Hi, my name is Gene Marquis. I'm a freelance clarinet and saxophone player in the Cincinnati area. I've had a wide range of experiences from symphony work to Broadway shows to pop music acts. You can access my webpage, eugenemarquis.com, and you'll see my full resume and the 15 different instruments that I played with the Cincinnati Symphony. All that information is in there. And if you want to contact me for any reason, you can contact me through my webpage. I want to thank Community Friends Meeting in Cincinnati. This is one of the 3 Quaker meeting houses in Cincinnati. They have beautiful gardens and things in the back that I thought would make a wonderful background for these videos. What I'm going to cover today is how I teach the fundamentals to my students. My students for years have heard me refer to these as my dumb, boring speeches, my way of explaining the nuts and bolts of how to play your instrument. It really starts with lessons with David Hite. I did learn some good things from other teachers before him, but when I started lessons with him, he really approached how to play the instrument, I would say, in a more scientific way. The first thing he taught me was not embouchure, but breathing, how to make your breathing muscles work. So the first thing I teach my students is that you must understand how muscles work before you can understand how to make your embouchure and your breathing and your throat and your tongue muscles. You need to understand a basic, simple principle, which is muscles can only be stimulated to contract. There's no way your nervous system can make a muscle expand. Because of that, most of the muscles in your body are set up in opposing groups. When you move your fingers, muscles on one side contract and pull, but to open your hand up, those same muscles don't push. Muscles on the opposite side contract and pull. So one set of muscles motion is always reversing its opposite muscles motion. You got biceps and triceps. If you look in a high school health book, you can find a picture of the human eyeball, and there's all these little strings around the eyeball that make the eye move, and it's all done by muscle contraction. Muscles cannot expand, they can only be stimulated to contract. You do have a specific kind of muscle on your lips, your embouchure muscle. This is called a sphincter muscle, which is like a rubber band that when it contracts will shrink. But again, you cannot push your mouth open that way. Muscles on the other part of your face will contract and pull. I'll get into more of that when I'm discussing embouchure. But the first thing I want to discuss is breathing techniques. I can't tell you how many times I've seen high school band directors and choir directors say, breathe from the diaphragm. This is not your diaphragm. These are where your abdominal muscles are. The diaphragm is like a drumhead kind of muscle attached all the way around and goes from front to back and side to side inside your body, makes 2 completely separate airtight compartments of your chest cavity and your abdominal cavity. When you go to breathe, the abdominal muscles in their expanded position are kind of humped up in the middle. And when your brain says inhale, the diaphragm contracts and pulls down. This lowers the air pressure in your chest cavity. And then we inhale because the air outside of your body is higher pressure than the inside of your body. To us, it feels like you're sucking the air in your mouth, but literally what's actually happening is the higher air pressure outside of your body is pushing inside your mouth until your lungs are inflated and the air inside your chest cavity is equalized. At the same time, when the diaphragm contracts to cause inhalation, it is also increasing the air pressure in your abdominal cavity. And what should happen is that when you inhale, the abdominal muscles should expand. Why? Because these are the strongest muscles to use as far as causing air pressure blowing in a wind instrument. If you breathe and raise your shoulders, then it's the weight of that pushing down that pushes the air out. If you happen to expand your chest, then it's that collapsing. But if you can concentrate so that the motion is only in the abdominal area, you will get much more power that way and ultimately be able to control the muscles in a musical way so you can modulate your dynamics. So the goal should be, when you inhale, you make the abdominal muscles the easiest place to move. And you do that by relaxing before you inhale. I'm going to exaggerate, but it should feel kind of like when you relax your muscles, your stomach literally wants to go bleh and droop down. You want it that relaxed so that it is the easiest place to move. That's the goal. In breathing correctly, you make this the easiest place to move by relaxing, so that when you contract the diaphragm, it pushes the abdominal muscles out. Now, when you are ready to exhale, the abdominal muscles contract, increase the air pressure in your abdominal cavity. That pushes on the bottom of the diaphragm, increases the air pressure in your chest cavity, and you exhale. That should be the correct way to breathe. I went through a lot of misunderstandings when I was a kid, figuring this out, because I heard one thing from David Hite, one thing from my junior high band director, one thing from the band director at Ohio State, and luckily my doctor, my family doctor, was a clarinet and saxophone player. So I went to him one day and said, I'm getting these mixed messages about breathe from the diaphragm. I know this is not the diaphragm. So he went to his doctor's collection of books and took out the skeletal muscular chart and showed me where all the muscles are, and he said, this is how it works. So I'm pretty sure what I just told you is more scientifically correct than some of the ways you hear breathing explained out there. Now there's another part of breathing technique that some people are mystified by, or maybe even get the information incorrectly. It's what is sometimes called pushing down with the diaphragm. Some brass players call it belt push breathing. I've heard singers and flute players call it resistance breathing, which is, and this may seem kind of contradictory, but after you inhale, before you exhale, what you want to do very slightly is, I'm exaggerating, you want to flex the muscle so that you are pushing your stomach out. This is, again, what I was taught was called pushing down with the diaphragm. The reason for this is that you have a muscle in the middle of your chest called the erectus abdominis muscle. It's the longest single strand muscle in your body, goes from your neck, the middle of your chest, and around your belly and ends below your belly button. And this muscle will tell your abdominal muscles what your throat is doing. And if your abdominal muscles get too hard, your throat will close. And this breathing technique called resistance breathing is that when you learn to slightly push down while you're exhaling. So I'm actually, 90% of the work is easily contracting the abdominal muscles and causing the inhaling. But at the same time, I'm slightly pushing down with the diaphragm against that. And the combination of those two in the right ratio will help your throat muscles stay relaxed and more open. I'm going to go over throat things in a separate part of this. But learning to push down with the diaphragm is an essential part of learning how to help your throat stay open and relaxed. I first learned about this breathing technique when I was struggling with the opening of the Weber concertino, that famous high B flat that everybody tries to start as soft as possible and then crescendo. And if you're not breathing correctly, you're either going to get a bump on the start, or you're going to get fwa. And David Hite said, well, push down with your diaphragm. And I said, what do you mean by that? And he explained it to me. And within a few minutes, I was learning how to push down with the diaphragm and helped keep my throat open, and suddenly controlling that B flat became much easier. So that was my introduction to pushing down with the diaphragm. Many years later, when I was visiting David Hite, he added a little more information to that, and that is that you don't use the same amount of pushing down with the diaphragm all the time. You push down more or less depending on the dynamics. That as you make a diminuendo, you slightly push down with the diaphragm a little bit more. So my normal range might be 5 or 10% resistance, but when I'm playing pianissimo really soft, it might go 10 to 15% resistance. So if you do not push down with the diaphragm at all, your throat will tend to close up, clench up uncontrollably. But if you push down with the diaphragm too much, then the same thing will happen. Your throat will tend to clutch and close. So part of the trick is that you have to experiment with different amounts of pushing down and be sensitive to what's going on in your throat. And that's another section in this video that I'll be covering, how your throat works and how to feel what's going on and that sort of stuff, and how to relate it, how to integrate it with this breathing technique. Okay, this next section is going to be about how your throat feels and what you need to learn to do to control it and use it to your advantage. What I figured out a long time ago in teaching my students is that it's easier to understand if you relate it to things you're already familiar with. So if you go to the swimming pool in the summer and your friends pick you up and they throw you in the water, you're going to go, you're going to take a breath, and then you're going to close your throat completely so that you don't swallow any water. So if you need to, you can close your throat completely. The next more open feeling compared to that is the way your throat feels when you whisper. When you whisper, you're just tightening your throat and letting just a little bit of air get through. Talking or singing is less restricted than that. And since that's something we do all the time, we're not even aware of much resistance at all when you're talking or singing. It's definitely less than whispering, but it's also less than the next notch that I describe, which is noisy breathing. I actually will have my students inhale and exhale noisily. Then I'll say, breathe as quiet as you can. I call that the relaxed silent breathing feeling. To put it simply, that's the goal of the way your throat should feel when you are blowing any air into any wind instrument. The only resistance that the wind should be pushing against is the resistance of the instrument. You should not be adding any more resistance by closing your throat. So again, the relaxed silent breathing feeling is the goal. You can exaggeratedly open your throat like a yawn, but if you do that and play an instrument, if you open your throat too much, you will tend to get flatter in your pitch and your tone will tend to spread a lot more. So again, the goal is the relaxed silent breathing feeling. To help my students figure out what their throat feels like, I came up with a little exercise that's similar to exercises I've heard other people use too. You take your clarinet or saxophone, you take an easy note, I'm going to make it open G, and you do a breath attack, but you do it very, very slowly. You start with air pressure nowhere enough to make the sound, and you gradually increase the air pressure until the reed starts to vibrate. And all the time you're doing that, you're trying to conjure up independently the relaxed silent breathing feeling. If you do it right, you should get a horrible attack on the note, a real fwa. Now what I'm doing is checking whether when the reed starts to vibrate, and that makes the instrument more resistant. What I'm blowing against when the reed's not vibrating is very low resistant. As soon as the reed vibrates, now there's more resistance to push against. And if you are playing incorrectly, when the reed starts to vibrate, you will feel your throat go clutch and grab. So this will not fix the situation, but it gives you a way of testing what goes on. So again, the goal is you blow air, get the throat, the relaxed, silent breathing feeling in your throat, and then blow hard enough to get the reed to vibrate and see whether your throat stays relaxed or clutches. I'm not using my tongue at all. It's strictly a breath attack. Once you have a handle on that and you learn to feel what your throat is doing, whether it's relaxed or tightening up, then you can add to the mix of what you're doing as you are doing the silent part of the sound. Vary how much you push down with the diaphragm. Don't push down at all and do the breath attack. Does your throat close? Push down a little bit. Does the throat close? Push down. You will find at some point where all of a sudden pushing down a certain amount helps your throat muscles stay much more relaxed than they would do otherwise just by trying to conjure up the relaxed silent breathing feeling. So once you do enough experimenting like that, how much do I push down? You get a feel for more or less the muscle memory of when I play, I push down this much ahead of time. And I vary it a little bit for dynamics. A little bit less pushing down for loud, a little bit more pushing down for soft. But this air exercise with these breath attacks, again, will help you learn to feel what's going on in your throat and then integrate pushing down the diaphragm different amounts to find what really gives you the right feeling for your throat. And all of this is communicated from the erectus abdominis muscle, telling your throat what's going on. When these muscles are working cooperatively, then you don't get throat tension. When your abdominal muscles tighten up, so does your throat. Long time ago, I had a student who came into a lesson and she said, I want you to punch me in the stomach. I want you to see how hard I can support with my diaphragm. And I said, I'm sorry, that's not your diaphragm. And that's the wrong way to breathe. When you tighten up the abdominal muscles that much, you're just making everything work against itself and you're getting very low efficiency. Now, related to what your throat does, and we've all most of us have heard that thing about open your throat more for low notes and raise the back of your tongue more like an E when you're playing higher notes. Now, I'm in the 9th grade and having lessons with David Hite. I'm in the practice room of Livermore Junior High and I'm trying this new idea, raise my tongue when I'm playing high notes. And I'm playing a high C and this is what came out. Whoa, what was that? That's kind of like Rhapsody in Blue. Can I do that again? Can I make it go up? And that's all from tongue motion in the back of my mouth. So I stumbled on how to do the high note part of Rhapsody in Blue by fooling around with what goes on with the E shape in the back of your mouth. So I'm sure that's how Johnny Hodges, the great lead alto player with Duke Ellington's band, how he did those amazing glissandos of his. Those could not have been done by embouchure only. If you loosen your embouchure, you might get a half step or a whole step drop. But I can take a high C down to at least an F, an E, with some reeds even down to a D. So that is just a side benefit of learning what you're supposed to do with your back of the tongue. That's how you do the Rhapsody in Blue glissando. So to wrap up on this part, in order for the throat to work correctly, it's part of how your abdominal muscles and your whole breathing system works. And again, that goes back to you have to understand how muscles work. So muscles can only contract Your abdominal and diaphragm muscles can only contract. You want the abdominal muscles to work in a way that do not make your throat muscles tighten up, and you learn to feel what's going on in your throat by that breath attack idea that I showed you. This section, I'm going to discuss how I explain embouchure to students. I do it a little bit differently than most teachers. I always tell my students that the goal of what I want it to look like and how it functions is no different than what other teachers want. I just have a little bit different way of explaining it. My father was a science teacher. Most of his life taught science in college. And at one point, Robert Marcellus accused me of being too scientific in the way I would explain things, because he would explain something to me, and then to double check, I'd give it back to him in the way I'd explain it, and he'd say, "You're too scientific," and I'd just say, "I'm sorry, that's the way I think." If I hadn't become a musician, I would have loved to work for NASA or something like that in the sciences. So that's just the way I think. So I explain embouchure more as its mechanical functions, what influences your mouth muscles have on the reed and the sound that comes out of your instrument. And I've tried to simplify this as much as possible. The first effect on your tone is how much reed do you put in your mouth. If you do not put very much reed in your mouth, then you force the very end of the reed to try to produce all the sound, and it'll be very muffled and weak. And starting a note will also be very sluggish. I probably have maybe 1/8 of an inch reed in my mouth. So if you don't take enough reed, you don't get very much sound. You get very sluggish attacks. You get a very muffled kind of tone quality. As you increase the amount of reed in your mouth, of course, it's going to get louder and more efficient because you're getting a longer and longer piece of reed vibrating. So I'm just going to play a note and increase the amount of reed in my mouth while I'm playing. I didn't blow any harder. I just took more reed. Now, of course, there's a limit to this. If you take too much reed in your mouth, all it does is squawk. It's uncontrollable. So the first thing a student needs to experiment with is how much reed do you take in your mouth? Too little, it's muffled and weak. You have to blow real hard, and you don't get much sound, and it's slow to start. Too much reed, it squawks. You need to find the happy medium. A second thing that your embouchure affects in the sound is how tight do you squeeze the reed. You have to squeeze the reed even slightly. If you're putting it in your mouth and making an airtight seal around the mouthpiece, even that slight amount is going to bend the reed closer to the mouthpiece. All mouthpiece manufacturers make the tip opening bigger than it's supposed to be for optimum sound, so that there's some wiggle room in there for you to squeeze closer to wherever the best sound is. So if you squeeze too loose, you're going to be flat. You're going to have a loud but very spready honk kind of a sound. If you bite too tight, then the reed can't vibrate far enough back and forth. I took the same amount of reed and was blowing just as hard, but I squeezed way too tight. So obviously a second thing that you need to experiment with is how tight do you bite the reed. Another thing is how do you form the shape of the muscles of your mouth. The word embouchure is a French word that really means the mouth of a river, but musicians have borrowed that word for centuries to mean how you use your facial muscles to produce your sound. Now this is where I kind of have made up my own terminology. The lower lip goes over the bottom teeth, and the muscles of the red part of your lip are trying to pull that part of your lip in your mouth. And when I show this to students, I tell them, do this. You pull your lip way in your mouth, like this. And I nickname that in-pull, because that's what it feels like what you're doing. You are pulling your lip in your mouth. So the muscle pull of the red part of your lip, pulling it into your mouth, over your bottom teeth, I call that in-pull. In-pull is in a tug of war with the opposing muscles starting at your lip line and going down the center of your chin. These muscles are contracting and trying to pull the red part of your lip out of your mouth. So they're pulling against each other like this, sort of in a tug of war. And the way that I get my students to understand that kind of a tug of war is that you pull your lip way in your mouth and then very slowly and tightly scrape it across your bottom teeth, and then stop moving, but don't stop pulling when you have the right amount of lip over your bottom teeth. So very slowly, I do that. This is the side view. Now, I have stopped with the right amount of lip over my bottom teeth, but I have not stopped pulling this way nor this way. This is the in pull. I call this down pull. It's not out this way. The muscles are pulling this way. So the tug of war is in pull like this and down pull like that, pulling against each other. And what that does is get the amount of lip over your bottom teeth thinner, because another goal is to minimize the amount of lip touching the reed. I have actually had clarinet students that would pull the clarinet in way too close, and they would actually get a mark all the way down their chin from the reed touching the lip and even their chin. And what that does is greatly muffle the vibration of the sound. So a goal is to try to minimize the size of the patch of skin that touches the reed. And you do that partly by the in pull and down pull pulling against each other. Now, there's a couple other things to discuss that most people have already heard about. There's at least two different embouchure styles. One is called a smile embouchure, and the other one is called, more commonly, an oval embouchure. Smile embouchure was predominant until at least maybe the middle of the 20th century, so it was very common for teachers to teach their kids to pull the corners a lot farther back, and that's how you made your embouchure. But sometime in the middle of the 20th century, and I think Robert Marcellus had something to do with this, because he was the beginning of the move towards a darker sound in the clarinet world. If you listen to orchestra recordings, the 1950s and earlier, some of the clarinet tone back then was very, very bright, almost like a C clarinet in Italy. Very, very bright. And then Marcellus went to a much darker sound, and his embouchure style is more what's again called an oval style. The oval style is where you measure how far apart the corners of your mouth are with your muscles completely relaxed. Then when you form the embouchure, it's only this way, not this way. So I'm going to tighten my embouchure in an oval style. You'll see that the corners do not spread. They tighten and they slightly push against my teeth, but they don't widen. And that's the oval embouchure, and that's definitely what has become the predominant style for the last 50, 60, 70 years. Okay, one more thing. There's a thing called single lip and double lip that probably a lot of you already know about, and it's very simple. Single lip is when you put your top teeth on the mouthpiece and your upper lip comes down in front of that and makes the seal. Your bottom lip is always over your bottom teeth, but in a single lip, the teeth are on the mouthpiece. In a double lip embouchure, your upper lip comes over your upper teeth like the bottom does, so that you are, in a way, sort of gumming the mouthpiece and the reed instead of having your teeth on the mouthpiece. It's a very personal choice. There are great players of both. There are people who have double lip embouchure with a beautiful sound and single embouchure players. I would bet that there are more clarinet only people who play double lip, that the doublers that I know who play 10, 15, 20 different sizes of instruments almost always are single lip players. And again, neither one is superior to the other, it's just a personal choice. When I first moved to Cincinnati to do my master's degree at CCM, I got hired to play extra clarinet with the Cincinnati Symphony, and at that time, Dick Waller was the first clarinet. He had a very dark sound, and he said he liked my playing, but my tone was too bright for him, and he wanted me to darken my sound. So for years, I did things, changed equipment, changed embouchure reeds to darken the sound. And then he retires, and Richie Hawley comes in and says, "Your sound's too dark." So at that moment, Carmine Campione took a chance to tap on my shoulder and said, "Let me help you with that," because he didn't like the changes I had made to darken my sound. It was more getting spreadier and a little flat sounding and stuff like that. So basically what I had done was let my embouchure get too loose. And one of the things that Carmine Campione had me do was play a chromatic scale from low E up to double C. Now hold the double C. All right, now remember how you play that? Play the low E the same way. And I thought, no, I can't do that. And what I had actually been doing was making too much of a change in the registers. I was too loose in the low register and maybe sometimes too high, too tight in the high register. And I found that as I tried to make a minimum amount of embouchure change in the registers, that pushed me into what everybody says is a better way, which is learning to control your sound with your throat and your tongue. So now I go from the top to the bottom to the top of the clarinet with probably no more than about a 5% increase in my embouchure tension, and all of the rest of it is with the throat. And as David Hite always liked to say, make the reed do the work. If you got the right reed, double C will pop out anyway too. In the middle of that embouchure change for Richie Hawley, I had visited David Hite, and he took opportunity to change something in my playing that he didn't like. When I studied with Robert Marcellus, he went through a period of time where he was advocating what he called the long bite, that if you had to really project over an orchestra, besides lifting your instrument up somewhat, that he would encourage you to take more reed than normal to get a louder sound. And I started playing that way too much of the time and spreading my sound. And David Hite said very simply, why don't you change back to not the most amount of reed that you can control, but take the amount of reed in your mouth that gives you your best tone. And that's what I've been doing for at least the last 20 years, is that the amount of reed in my mouth is not the most efficient nor the loudest, but it's the amount of reed that gives me my best tone quality. Okay, to wrap up, again, it all starts with understanding how muscles work, that muscles can only contract. But then you need to study all of these separate things, how breathing works, how your throat works, how the embouchure works. You study them independently. But as you refine what you're doing with them, you're going to find that they're all interconnected and one influences the other. You can't change one thing without rocking the boat and having to reset other things. So these exercises that I've given you ways to assess it will hopefully help you through the morass of figuring this stuff out, because it really is a real trial and error process of try this, no, that sounds worse, try that, oh, that sounds better, until you keep wandering around and finding all the combinations that make it work best for you. Good luck.